I'm Jason Hart with Mossy Oak. Welcome to Turkey Academy. I've been very fortunate to have chased what we call the Grand Slam and also the Royal and World Slam. The Grand Slam is harvesting and or hunting the 4 subspecies that we have in the United States. First off is the Eastern. That's what I grew up hunting, which represents the majority of the wild turkeys in the United States. Easterns go from all the way as far north as Ontario, all the way west as East Texas, and all the way south as North Florida. The Eastern wild turkey is typically known as the toughest of the subspecies. That can sometimes be the case, in particular if they have a lot of pressure. So states like Mississippi, states like Alabama, states like South Carolina are typically known as some of the hardest of the subspecies. I believe that's because of the amount of pressure they receive, but they can really be hard anywhere that you hunt them. The Eastern is known for having the loudest, most thunderous gobble. Easterns, as far as their color variation on their tail fan, they are known of having a chestnut, the tips on the ends of their tail feathers are typically a chestnut color. So they are very, very dark in coloration, only darker than that of the Osceola down in Florida. Speaking of the Florida wild turkey, known as the Osceola, their traditional range is south of Central Florida. The Osceola is the only subspecies that is only found in one state, which is Florida. The Osceola tends to have the longer legs of the 4 subspecies that make up the Grand Slam. They're traditionally known as having the sharper spurs, and they can be extremely wary. Their gobble is not as thunderous as the Eastern, but typically has more of a loud crack to it. And many times the Osceola will come in a setup and come into your calling like a ghost. But they can also be very vocal as well. A lot of people say that Osceolas don't talk. When they get hunted, they don't talk, but if you're hunting on an unpressured property, they will be very vocal. Moving on to the next subspecies that I've had the privilege of hunting often is the Rio Grande. Rio Grande turkeys are very different from the Eastern and the Osceola subspecies. Rios are an awful lot of fun to hunt if they're abundant. Traditional range of the Rio Grande wild turkey is Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, and parts of Mexico on some of the bordering states. But the Rio Grande can be found, they've been relocated to other states, such as California and Oregon. The Rio Grande, its gobble is very different from that of the Eastern and Osceola, and I think that gobble is different because it may carry over a longer distance. On years that they have a lot of rain and it is very lush and green, really good hatches can happen, and what that means is there's a lot of longbeards 2 years later. And the final subspecies that I'll discuss in the Grand Slam of the wild turkey is the Merriam subspecies. The Merriam subspecies are known as a Western United States bird, typically found in the Rocky Mountain regions. States like Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona is where the Merriams originated. They're now in other states. But the Merriam's traditionally has very long legs, blunt spurs, and it has a very white tail fan. Merriams can be a lot of fun to hunt as well, and they can be very fun in areas that aren't pressured, in areas with a large distribution. And as far as all of the subspecies in the United States, a lot of them have similarities. A lot of them also have big differences. Some of the similarities is calling. You typically can use the same calls all over. Although I've found that Merriams and Rios, many times their hens have a little higher pitched vocalization, in particular in their clucks. Many times they'll sound more like a pip than a cluck that you get on Easterns or Osceolas. Another similarity is the way they taste. I've not found any difference in the meat from a Western Merriam's to a Southern Osceola, and put in the frying pan, they're all fantastic. As far as hunting is concerned, they can all be different. I typically have found that Easterns, from where they roost throughout the day, are in a lot smaller travel range than what you'll find of the Merriams. What I've found of Merriams is when the Merriams hit the ground, they are running all day. And if you don't get in front of a Merriams to get where they're going, they're gonna be really hard to call back. Whereas in Eastern, many times if you hunt an Eastern or an Osceola in the same general location of where they hang out in the morning. If you spend enough time, you're typically going to find them in that same area on the same day. Now, as far as the subspecies are concerned, they all live in very different terrain. Easterns in particular can live in the bottomland swamps of the south all the way to the high ridge tops of the Appalachian Mountains. The Osceola can live in cattle pastures. They can live in orange groves. They can also live in water-covered swamps. The Rio Grande is usually in areas very open, very dry, full of cacti, full of mesquite trees. Whereas the Merriams, they're typically going to live in the Rocky Mountains. But one thing about turkey hunting is there's no always. Turkeys are yes, no, and maybe as far as all the subspecies are concerned.